Productions, and today we're interviewing Mr. David Sifuentes about 19th century hunting shirts. David is a prolific maker of hunting shirts of the period, and so I'm interviewing him in order to share information and dispel some of the misconceptions that exist around them.
Yeah, so as Mason was saying, my name's David Sifuentes. I've kind of been in the hobby itself for like well over 10 years now and been in the authentic side just about when I came in, really. I keep on trying to learn from the best, trying to garner all sort of information on anything that I try to research, primarily from the original source documents or images. So there's a whole lot of that can be gleaned on, which is mostly what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, so I do have a list of questions prepared. Um, but I think we should start off with basics before we get into some of the more advanced questions. So, do you mind first off just saying what is a hunting shirt in the first place? I know we're both wearing them, but some viewers might not be aware of what a hunting shirt is or the terminology associated with them. So, if you don't mind, do you think you could possibly tell us a little bit more about them?
So overall, Neil Hurst is probably going to be he's going to be the one that just about everyone references when it comes to hunting shirts in general. And his thesis will always be where I try to point people out first to see them in an 18th century context. As a garment, it's meant to be an outer garment that's supposed to protect everything underneath, be it a coat, a waistcoat, definitely your actual shirt. And they develop around the whole Pennsylvania, Virginia region in around the 1750s, 60s, and by the time of the Revolution is when we actually start to see them being referenced as this solidly American garment. Overall, what they're most well known for is being a caped split front shirt, and the length of them, especially by the time you get into the 19th century, can vary. They can be on the shorter end, especially as you get closer to mid-century, and then they could be anywhere up to knee length for the longest part of them. Overall, they start to end up morphing from what they were. Like in the 18th century, you what you see them originally having is maybe having just the cape itself acting as the collar. By uh, by the 19th century, you're definitely starting to see more actual collars being attached to the garment. You're also starting to see different types of standing collars and other things. But there's also various garments that still exist well into the 1860s, especially in like Indian territory, where they still kind of have that older nuance of just having the shirt body with the cape attached to it and no collar. But overall, it's a distinctly American garment. Even in the 1820s, there's a political piece in a newspaper, and it ends up mentioning how like America may have broken away from Great Britain, but overall, we're still using blankets, knives, different types of just cookware, and even certain dishes, and even all these senators and everyone, they're still wearing European classical, like English fashion. But then it does rejoice that certain senators and certain representatives from like Kentucky or Tennessee, they're still wearing the classic American hunting shirt. And I can't quote it verbatim, but it says something along the lines of "God bless the American hunting shirt," and then it just goes on saying this is something that's distinctly American.
Well, thank you. So as you mentioned, with our by the year 1800, the hunting shirt had gained popularity across the country as a working man's garment. Do you mind going into detail? I know you mentioned a quote from the 1820s, and you mentioned them existing into the 1860s, especially into Indian territory. But had it gained popularity across the country, or for its existence, did it remain more a frontier garment, so to say?
It remains a mostly frontier garment. You'll still see certain personalities, especially that being of Sam Houston. He's very flamboyant early in his life, being part of the Creek War, and he's known for going to Washington D.C. wearing Cherokee dress in this instance and getting raked over the coals by John C. Calhoun for him being an American citizen, going on official government business and wearing uh, native clothes. So whether or not he took that to heart and just completely went the opposite way, or if it was just in his nature, what you see from him, especially, is when he becomes elected governor of Tennessee, he's recorded wearing a bedazzled Cherokee hunting shirt, a leather hunting shirt. And then again, when he becomes president of Texas, he's again recorded wearing a hunting shirt for his inauguration. And then again, when he's elected as a United States Senator for the state of Texas, it's mentioned that he's wearing a Cherokee hunting shirt. So it kind of like evolves as this symbol, if you will, that certain people will carry distinctly. There's even various types of dress up balls in Washington and other cities in the East, like New York, where people are trying to emulate like Cleopatra or some other people of bygone history. But they'll also mention two people showed up dressed up as Texas Rangers, and it goes on about they sprinkled black powder into the ice cream that they were eating, and they're just trying to play up this whole frontiery background, and they're all wearing hunting shirts, is what's recorded. But by and large, if you are wearing them in that Eastern context, you're either wearing them as a type of hunter and less as something as a status symbol as someone more civilized. You're trying to go against the grain and trying to present yourself as old timey and frontiery.
And building off that idea, I know you mentioned Sam Houston with the Cherokee hunting shirts. Are they commonly worn amongst Native Americans, or is it only certain tribes that wear them? How common are they, effectively?
They are very common. I've kind of become known for kind of gathering various images. One thing that I haven't quite done yet is gathering all the images of 19th century hunting shirts, which I think I may end up trying to do now. But you have a lot of tribes just across the entire eastern seaboard. You have like the Iroquois with Red Jacket being Seneca. He's known very much for wearing one down south all the way to Florida. You have the Seminoles coming up with their very distinct style, ribboned and bedecked. You have the Cherokee are well known for wearing them, and there will even be different accounts distinctly, like in the Second Seminole War. It states that several men from Georgia in a battalion marching down to Florida that they're wearing leather Cherokee hunting shirts. So you can kind of see these various stylizations. The Shawnee, the Delaware, Kickapoo, all these various groups all end up developing them and making them their own. By the time you even get into the desert southwest, I haven't researched whereabouts they came, but you'll even see certain caped leather overshirts. Some of them are pullovers. Some of them are split front, like a very short jacket, and they're being worn by the Apache in the desert Southwest, close to like the 1860s and 70s and later.
Uh, all right, awesome. Thank you. And just one more thing on that. If they're worn, I more so to build off of what you're saying. They're a cheap and simple garment. Would you say so? They're like a very cheap and simple working man sort of garment.
Very much so.
Well, with that being said, would they have been worn by the enslaved populations across the frontier? Do we have any documentation to indicate that, or
None so much that I've found. If if someone enslaved may end up following their master into the frontier, like they'll probably be wearing various types of hunter clothes. So they would probably be wearing some type of blanket coat or a hunting shirt and just trying to wear something that would be conducive to the environment that they're about to go into. But overall, let's say on actual plantations or for actual agricultural work, they're most likely wearing some type of like a definite enslaved clothing of some nature. A whole lot of it's advertised in period newspapers of the time, even including blanket coats made out of cheaper material. And most of it's all made out of that cheap material, like you'd already suggested. But it still remains more of the garment that you're wearing if you're about to enter the woods or the wilderness.
gotcha? And I think building even more so off of this, I know you mentioned that there's records to indicate that they were being worn by Native American tribes from the 1860s through to the 1870s in certain regions of the frontier. Is there any evidence to indicate that they would have been worn at all during the Civil War? Like when do
There,
they die out?
there were units that suggested that they'd wear them kind of on the Confederate side, harkening back to their whole thing of fighting for hearth and home and trying to symbolize like we are just like our ancestors, be it in the War of 1812 or earlier to the American Revolution, kind of invoking that earlier time frame. I'm not certain how many of them actually did carry out with it, and overall it would have been a very small contingent within the war. Like the authentic side of Civil War reenactors, you won't see very many of these hunting shirts, and for good reason. At least on the Anglo side, in Indian territory, it's still a predominant mode of dress, especially for the five civilized tribes as they're participating in various raids there, either with the first mounted Cherokee rifles or other type of units from the Choctaw or Seminole or any of those other various groups.
Awesome. And you mentioned that they weren't very common by the end of by the time of the Civil War period. Do they evolve into anything, or do they just sort of fizzle out? Is there garments that are later on that we see later on in the 19th century that are reminiscent of hunting shirts, or does the hunting shirt just sort of fizzle out and go out completely out of style? Like, I don't know, leather vests from the 1970s. Like, we don't see those anymore. Is it the same thing with the hunting shirts?
They kind of evolve. More specifically, I think the proper term for them mostly is some type of scout jacket. Some of those they remain capeless and they just have a collar, but others throughout the 1870s and 80s I've found where they still retain the cape, the fringes, either split front or closed up, and so it does end up evolving into this new type of garment out on the plains, and then even like let's say into the 1880s and 90s, as you have a Daniel Carter beard and the appearance of the Boy Scouts or their original group, Sons of Daniel Boone, they're trying to at least pick up in the American boy psyche. That's they give instructions. This is how you can pattern a hunting shirt, and this is like how you this is how you can emulate Daniel Boone, Simon Kenton, and all these other older American names.
You mentioned patterns. Is there a way, like, since the hunting shirt originates in the 1760s and basically is almost like you say, it's a remnant of the past by the time of the 1860s, is there any way that you could possibly break down some of the major changes that we see with hunting shirts, especially in regards to pattern?
They remain a very uh, varied garment throughout their history. They can be as long as short as the maker ends up making them. There are different. little nuances that you can try to find as far as cape length. Most of it I probably couldn't end up describing to you that well. Um, they can be made either to overlap the body. We know that Joseph Doddridge mentions that they overlap by a good several inches to leave it as a pocket so that you could stick certain things into. Other ones you see, like even the one that I'm wearing, it's only meant just to button right up immediately down the front. And even for certain other tribes, it is only something that I've ever seen from the Native Americans. It's not something that I've seen among any sort of Anglo shirts. Um, like the 1970s, 1980s, starting into this whole muzzleloading craze, you get to see the pullover cape shirts, and this is like you can be Jeremiah Johnson or anyone else from those Hollywood movies of the time, and it still remains. You can still buy those type of shirts. They have an element of truth, but they are again nuanced. You see, there's some artwork of some of those shirts in the Charles Bird King art. Primarily, it's the Shawnee and a few others of those tribes. You see distinctly, it's a pullover caped hunting shirt. But that's very rare, not something that I'd suggest for someone unless they do dive into that little tangent, that little niche group, if you will, for sleeves for hunting shirts. They can end up being large in some capacity, still following, let's say, what most reviewers might know as the 18th century sleeve style with the gauging on top and then terminating into some sort of cuffs. Others of them end up being more narrow, and even some of the cuffs may end up having some weirder trapezoidal shapes. The Michael Crow shirt, for instance, from 1799, it has a very distinct shape on its cuffs that kind of offset it down from the majority of the sleeve, and some of them don't have any sort of cuff whatsoever. In the 1830s, specifically from what I remember, there's accounts talking about the shirts that are being worn that they're tight fitting, and that's what they're really trying to emphasize. You can see some of that even on the Alfred Jacob Miller art. Um, for the most part, most people wouldn't exactly recognize them today as hunting shirts, but within the time period, that's definitely how they were referred to. And if you look at his field sketches, they're a very patterned garment. They do reflect the common pattern of the time with the keyhole back and uh, and even articulated sleeves. The hunting shirt I'm wearing today has articulated sleeves. It's based off of a Cherokee design from the Smithsonian, dates it around 1800. I'd probably put it a little bit later, but not by that much. And so you'd have a two-piece sleeve design or some other variety. So it can vary a lot overall.
So you mentioned makers and whatnot, and people in how a lot of these details are left up to the individual maker. Is that to suggest that the manufacture of hunting shirts is a cottage industry, or especially as we get into the time frame of the Industrial Revolution, do we see hunting shirts being produced en masse, or do they just remain a very individualistic garment? Everybody basically makes their own and the results vary depending on who you are and what you want specifically for yourself.
It remains mostly a cottage industry. It's not really picked up by the Industrial Revolution per se. Let's say in the War of 1812, hunting shirts again are used as a form of uniform for militia troops, either coming out of Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, those regions. It's even employed a little bit by some United States rifle corps, and those like the rifle corps shirts most likely followed a basic pattern for the militiamen. It could have been anything goes for whoever it was that was sewing those shirts back at home. The only stipulations would have been the color of the main body and then the color of the fringe, some of them being a blue body with a red background on the fringe or black with red fringe, and that sort of variable. Out west in St. Louis during the fur trade, you could end up picking up pre-made garments of buckskin jackets or hunting shirts or trousers before actually heading west. It's kind of something that you don't really hear about a lot, especially among the trapper contingent of reenactors or living historians. But in that regard, you have that connection to civilization where you're actually buying something pre-made, especially going against the grain of manufacturing it yourself out in the field. That's something that you don't see much at all, except for, let's say, maybe moccasins or making something on the fly because your gear actually broke down. The Let's see, kind of building on that train of thought, if I can get it back again, um, for in 1820 or 19, I forget the specific year, Stephen Long ends up having an expedition out west, kind of to survey and explore the wilderness at the time. He has a man in his company by the name of Peel, and he has a shirt. He has an actual buckskin shirt, pullover style, and then a buckskin jacket that would have fallen underneath the hunting shirt class, made along with a pair of underdrawers. All of these made out of buckskin for the shirt and underdrawers, a thinner style. But those, they're very much no frills attached. There's not really very many much fringe to them whatsoever, and it's a very utilitarian garments. And those were manufactured for him by a native woman that they met along the way. So that kind of plays into the whole industry as a whole. But there aren't very many advertisements compared to, let's say, blanket coats, which could have even been bought somewhere along the East Coast. So it's a smaller industry.
So with that industry, are they manufactured as a trade good as well? Are they manufactured with the intention? I'm not sure if are they manufactured with the intention of being sold at places like the Rendezvous, the later on in the fur trade? Will vendors bring in hunting shirts, these pre-made hunting shirts from places like St. Louis, in order to sell them in exchange for the furs, or do we not, or do we mostly just see them being relegated to these more eastern cities?
For the most part, I've not really seen them on inventory list as it compares to calico shirts or muslin shirts or some other type of like pre-made fabric clothing. So I'd probably say it wouldn't be something that you'd see brought out to Rendezvous. There'd be individuals that would likely buy something off of someone else, and even during the period, you'd have travelers, let's say Audubon or even some other people going out west to California, they'd buy hunting shirts off of tribes in Indian territory as kind of a curio, and that helps that helps us even have them nowadays as some sort of extant garments. Um, the majority of hunting shirts that do survive are leather. I can't think of any cloth hunting shirts that do survive from 1800 to the 1860s that are particularly Anglo. There are some that are native, but overall, the hunting shirts that we do have with us left are a leather garment. Some of them were picked up as people were traveling west, either going to California or just going to kind of see the wilderness as it was and coming back with these curios.
Okay. So with that being said, um, as they're curios, it's almost as if that our first hunting shirts that, or the hunting shirts that we have left, they're almost like the first American souvenirs. Is that the way, like, is that what you're trying to get at? Is like effectively they're much like how nowadays when you visit a historic site or something, you'll get a t-shirt that says, "Oh, I went to Fort Clatsop," or "I went to Fort Laramie," or Chimney Rock, or something like that. Um, is that effectively what we're seeing here with a lot of our extant garments? Is that people are bringing them home as souvenirs?
You can definitely say that. Some of the ones that do remain. There's one that's in the Met Museum in New York. It's a full suit. It has a buckskin hunting shirt plus an embroidered vest and a set of trousers. There's one at the Autry in LA, and it's also a suit, very well preserved. It didn't look like it showed much use, and yeah, even Audubon's shirt ends up getting preserved for us. A whole lot of people are grabbing these things and bringing them back. It's kind of just it comes with the territory when you're trying to discover somewhere new. Like you can even think about all the different artifacts collected on the Lewis and Clark expedition, brought back to Jefferson that you can see there at his home. So if anyone wants to try to retain at least some little touch of what they did encounter out west.
That's incredibly fascinating. Uh, you mentioned that you've made how many hunting shirts at this point? 17, I think was the number you told me. What do you
17 is the current number, and I've got one that I'll probably try to cut out today.
Oh, so with manufacturing hunting shirts from this 1800 to 1860 period, what are some of the common mistakes that you see people make? Especially with this fur trade community, we oftentimes see a lot of very fantasy or a lot of creative liberties taken with a lot of these garments that people want to try to recreate. But based off the evidence that you have and the research that you've done, what are some of the common mistakes that we do see?
What we definitely see is people try to think that old-timey means primitive, and primitive in the context of I'll make it up with a bone needle and some sinew, which that's probably swinging the pendulum a little too far, but I'm trying to emphasize the point in this context of what we see is people trying to say, well, they use whatever they had. I'm going to use these sewing techniques that just they're easier for me. They're what I know. I've seen some people kind of sew a lap joint on a sleeve that's more similar to, let's say, a 1970s buckskin coat that maybe you'd see at like Burning Man or something to that effect. And people, they're taking what they know about modern garments and transposing them over, making large stitches or large pieces of fringe. Even for some of the cloth garments, there's various retailers that are well known within the community, and let's say they're using very large, very uh, silly string style looking fringe coming off of them, and it's very obtuse. Some of the materials themselves, they almost look like rayon or some sort of more modern fabric versus what we know they're being manufactured of, being primarily by this time cotton ends up being king. Then there's obviously linsey woolsey and even linen to some extent, and then obviously buckskin as well. And even on the buckskin side of things, it could either be some form of Indian tan, a brain tan, or even some type of like alum or a more advanced or modern style of tanning at the time.
All right. Well, David, that's all the questions I had for you. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come and talk with us about hunting shirts in the period. I had this idea a few weeks ago. I've been in contact with you. We've been chatting back and forth about various information and whatnot. And once again, I really want to thank you for coming out. As always, I'm Flintlock and Tomahawk Productions. David, is there anything else you'd want to say before I sign out?
Just to have people continue to have a open mind to history, and then especially as you just continue on your journey, you'll find the more stuff that you do discover, you realize we'll never know everything, but from what we do understand, we can be more cemented within our actual living history presentations. So the more you find out, the less you'll end up saying if they'd had it, they'd have used it. And the more that you do find, even though everything is different, it can all be gathered together in a more general strain. So just keep on researching and keep on trying to do things right, educate yourselves, and hopefully educate the public too.
All right. Well, David, once again, thank you. As always, viewers, I am Flintlock and Tomahawk Productions. This has been an interview with David Sifuentes, and now I am signing out.